Thank you, Harry. Well, I don't know. I mean, the problem with the lawyers is that they always tend to indulge in a lot of legalese. But unfortunately, that has been the biggest bane of the whole sector in the last few years, unfortunately, the judicial pronouncements. But on the lighter side, I think I can certainly say that the economic impact of judicial decisions in matters like these is surely extremely positive so far as my community is concerned. So the lawyers have had a field day, and well, they've had large number of briefs, heftily paid. But then we are losing the larger picture here, and the larger picture is...
Before you go to that, I also said in the last session, I wish I was a lawyer. This is never-ending process.
Yeah. I can understand that, but then it's not to defend the profession. It's not a profession for the chicken-hearted. Now, so if I'll try to go back to the legal regime that we have had in the field of judicial review, and pardon me for being a little historical about it. If you see the evolution of judicial review, which is on the constitutional platform, fundamentally we had seen originally a very restrained approach of the Supreme Court, and for that matter all the high courts as well, that they said, all right, we'll interfere only when there is a direct infraction of fundamental rights. So if you see the hierarchy of the jurisprudence is 21, infraction of right to liberty and life, then 19, the rights guaranteed under 19, freedom of expression, right to carry on business, right of association. Then it comes down to Article 14, and the 14 came with a rider, and the rider prior to a judgment of the Supreme Court in Royappa was that you will review a administrative action only from the perspective of discrimination. And if you can make out a class and justify the discrimination on the basis of the nexus to the object which you seek to achieve, the action is valid. Then we diluted it further, and said no. Now when this various principle is evolved in England, we'll say every action of the state will be tested on Article 14 of reasonableness. So far, so good. Then came the era of public interest litigation. I think that is something which has done so much of damage to the whole concept of judicial review. Because our maturity, our society, the citizens, as well as with due respect to the judiciary, was not matured enough to really understand. We could justify cases like Bhagalpur, Mussoorie quarrying case, or maybe Nainital being, it submerged in the lake. But you surely can't extend that principle beyond a limit. And then you start encroaching on virtually running the country. And the funniest thing I heard somebody telling me in Singapore the other day, you have a great Supreme Court which decides as to what color of a film is to be put on the car on the screen of a car. So that is where we have taken this whole process to. Well, fine. If we start looking at these decisions which have happened from a prism of corruption, I think they were perfectly justified. But this aberration has become the rule rather than the exception. Therefore, what is very significant is that we have reached a stage in the jurisprudence of judicial review where Supreme Court should clarify that, look, what we have decided, right, wrong, indifferent, is something which we have been discussing since the morning. We will continue to discuss, but then that's the situation that we have today. And remedies, of course, we can come to later. But the Supreme Court must clarify that we are not compromising on the basic tenets of review of an administrative or a government election or a statute. This damage, if allowed to continue, will keep that subjectivity in the whole system, which can be misused and which is capable of really making our life difficult. So now let's draw a line today, and that line is that, look, because let's now test, for example, a judicial review in a tender case. What is a principle of L1? L1 is a principle which says that the lowest should be given. Now L1 is not something which is evolved by a law which says how you evaluate a tender. L1 is a principle of corruption and it is a guideline issued by the Central Vigilance Commission. We have blindly extended it to the whole process of evaluation. And we simply say, and I'll share a very interesting experience with you which I had. I'm sorry I'm being a little too historical about it, but then I thought I'll just drive home the point. I filed a case in the Andhra Pradesh High Court. I filed a case. I was not awarded as L2 a contract for setting up a center for molecular biology in the heart of Hyderabad. My client bid 140 crores. L1 bid 70 crores. My technology was a steel box technology in which the entire process of the experimentation was to be done in a closed steel box because it's a very sensitive matter. Because if there is a leakage, you could have viruses spread all over the city. L1 had a technology which was concrete technology. And when I got up in the court, I said, can you really compare apple and oranges? Because the tender says you will decide the technology, you will decide the design, you will design it because it's a design and build contract, and then you will construct the facility. It was impossible for me to even give an illustration because what had L1 done? He had given you a list of BOQs, as we say in construction industries. BOQs means which is switches. He had gone right to the details of the switches, etc., etc. When the design itself is not clear, not approved by the engineer, I respectfully told the judge, if I give the contract of this building to a contractor and say I want 20 courtrooms and minimum size should be this, please submit your design and build it. Can he at that stage say no? Until the detailed engineering design is complete, that look, this switch is going to come here, and that plug is going to come there, and that fan is going to come there. A bidder who submits a rogue bid is ultimately not going to do the work. Now here is a classic case, and I was thrown out in 5 minutes because you're not L1. This is something which we really need to look at very, very differently. Number two, the whole concept of judicial review, what we have started extending, the concept of judicial review to public-private partnership projects blindly. You can say that a PPP project is amenable to writ jurisdiction and therefore everything that you do will judicially review. That concept has not been tested at all. Not a single court, there have been judgments which have said that the Right to Information Act will be applicable to Mumbai Airport. Your tender will be subject to judicial review because the airport authority has a stake in the airport. And the matter is still pending in the Supreme Court. There is no decision. There is no distinction drawn between wherever the private sector money is coming in, how do you divide the functions of that entity? Are there public functions? Or are they commercial functions? Why did you bring in the private sector and for what purpose? So it's basically this philosophy which has not been tested at all. And there is nobody who has actually advocated this philosophy openly. I can understand. If you are given an airport project to a joint venture of government and private party, the passenger has a right as a stakeholder to come and maintain a claim in a high court. But you can't say that a bidder, because the whole purpose of granting this largesse was you wanted to bring in private sector efficiencies and you wanted to remove that whole rigmarole of the administrative action which goes on with the babus, etc., etc. It is actually that thinking that we need to change. And unless we change that thinking and raise these issues, and this is the topic on which we should have events, conferences, bring in the judges, make them hear that look, this is an aspect which we have not been able to address so far at all. So I mean, there are a large number of issues which I can get into, but I think as we move along, probably I'll make my comments. But broadly speaking, it is more of a philosophical issue rather than it's an approach issue, a complete conceptualization issue, which is very, very critical to ensure that the courts have that attitude and the material before them and the expertise to really answer this question.
I want to just comment on one thing which came in the morning session but is relevant to what you're just saying. With the more and more thing about Make in India that the Modi government is talking about, and PPP is coming in, even in defense now, and the fact that the Delhi High Court has upheld that, if I'm not wrong, that the Reliance infrastructure and Tatas in Delhi are subject to a CAG audit, even the private company. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you see, I think CAG audit is... I think that CAG is a major issue because the guidelines for audit of PPP were already in the pipeline. They were already drafted. I don't think we should really fear that. What we need to really bother about is the fact that can we extend judicial review? Because if we look at whether it's power sector, whether it is telecom. Now, how is telecom different from a power where forget power for a moment. There are PPPs where government is a shareholder. How is, as compared to that, a license is given for telecom, a license is given to manufacture electricity act completely, you can manufacture, you can generate power because it's completely unfettered now after the 2003 act. But how is a shareholding distinct from a license? Because hitherto everything was reserved for the state, whether it was the Telegraph Act, whether it was the Electricity Act, it has now been opened. Once it has been opened, everything is PPP. So I don't think that it is a question of ownership, it's a question of who's putting in the money.